Donald Trump cannot stop losing, and that means his press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, is losing it because her boss continues to suffer defeat after defeat in the courts, most recently over his tariffs. He's facing opposition to his budget bill from Republicans in the Senate, and every single day his approval rating continues to sink. And if that wasn't bad enough for Karoline Leavitt, she was just personally hit with a brutal lawsuit for something she did recently in the press briefing room. We are going to get into it all, but before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me. Now, before we get into the personal struggle that Karoline Leavitt is dealing with right now, I want to start with the political, and Jessica Tarloff broke that all down right here.
And I'm also committed to the truth, Jesse. And the truth is that the Democrats are very unpopular, but so is a lot of what Donald Trump is doing. So in polling, Marquette, Fox News, all the goodies, he's down 16 on the economy, down 14 on foreign policy, 26 on handling tariffs, and 32 on cost of living. And this reconciliation bill that they're trying to pass through the Senate right now has opposition from more senators than they can handle. So you've got the Josh Hawleys of the world, who's miraculously concerned about throwing people off Medicaid. Rick Scott and Maria Bartiromo was raking him over the coals this morning about his views. Rand Paul, who has been talking about everything from how unconstitutional it is for Trump to be putting in these tariffs to how we're ballooning the deficit. Ron Johnson, Susan Collins, Jerry Moran. Those are a lot of senators that you've got to get on board. So if this is the big ticket item, right, this is the big marquee agenda piece that we're going to give tax cuts to the wealthy and we're going to take away food assistance and Medicaid, so we're hurting the poor to help the rich. That does not bode well for 2026 for the Republicans or for 2028, when we're going to have a big, beautiful primary and we will get a great candidate and everyone will forget about the hoity-toity and we shall be victorious.
Funny, Jessica thinks she...
All the actions they thought that they would take to boost their political standing have in fact backfired. And we talked about this most recently with the screaming match that broke out at the White House over Donald Trump's failure to hit his goals on his illegal deportations. The reason that he has turned to straight up kidnapping people in an illegal effort to make some publicity stunt for his immigration plan. This is all everything has become under Donald Trump's administration. It's all one big publicity stunt. And that's why Karoline Leavitt is so important. She is the front person to go out and lie on behalf of Donald Trump as his tariffs continue to fail, as all his plans backfire. And clearly she's not doing too good of a job, at least certainly when it comes to talking about Donald Trump's budget bill, which Republicans more and more are coming out against, not just because of the increased deficit spending, but the way that it directly undermines the authority of our courts. But Karoline Leavitt, she tried to respond, and it didn't go too well. Then we're going to check out the lawsuit that is really making her life a problem.
Switching gears, Carol.
Just following up on Warren Davidson, I wanted to read you his quote that he posted online. While I love many things in the bill, promising someone else will cut spending in the future does not cut spending. Deficits do matter, and this bill grows them. Why should that get a Republican primary?
This bill saves $1.6 trillion for the American taxpayer. It saves more than any bill that has ever passed Capitol Hill has. In fact, by double. The next bill saved $800 billion. This bill saves $1.6 trillion. So this is a very good bill for the American people, the American taxpayer. And I believe, as an outlet put it with a headline this morning, it might have been Politico actually, they wrote that the American people are going to be flush with cash when this thing is signed into law. And that's a good thing for American taxpayers.
No, Karoline, much like most of the things you say, that's just not true. This bill does increase spending, increases deficit spending to levels we have never seen before. For all these people who talk about how Republicans are budget hawks and they make the economy boom, well, let's take a look at the last couple of Republican presidents. I think the complete opposite has happened. So can we get rid of that ridiculous notion, which even Republicans in the Senate are calling out? Ron Johnson said this bill was going to affect generations to come. Lindsey Graham of all people, knocked the idea of kicking the can down the road and saying, well, we'll take care of spending cuts later in the future. Even he knows that that is not going to happen. And that's kind of the whole point. is that they know this is a big lie. It's the reason that they were voting on it at 1 a.m. It's the reason they rushed it so much. A Republican member of Congress admitted he didn't read the thing. How are you an elected official and you don't read the bills you're voting on? That is insane. But someone who will actually have to do some reading on a big old document that they were just served up is Karoline Leavitt, who, like I said, got hit with a brutal lawsuit, and I want to take a look at that right here. White House sued for abruptly halting services for deaf when Trump took office. The National Association for the Deaf, NAD, sued the White House for allegedly violating federal laws in the U.S. Constitution by declining to provide American Sign Language interpreters at prominent events like briefings and press conferences. According to the 25-page suit, the White House abruptly stopped providing services for deaf and hard of hearing individuals when Donald Trump took office in January. In January 2025, the White House inexplicably stopped using ASL interpreters for any of its public press conferences or similar events, the suit said. The White House's failure to provide qualified ASL interpreters during public briefings, press conferences, and related events is against the law. Federal law unequivocally prevents discrimination against individuals with disabilities and requires them to have meaningful access to the federal government's programs and services. Failing to provide ASL interpreters deprives deaf people of meaningful access to White House's press briefings. In a statement, interim NAD CEO Dr. Bobby Beth Scoggins insisted that deaf and hard of hearing Americans have the right to the same access to the White House's information as everyone else. Denying them ASL interpreters is a direct violation of the right, and the NAD will continue to fight for their full inclusion in the democratic process. Such information must be provided not only through captioning, but also in American Sign Language, she added. NAD successfully sued the White House in 2020, resulting in the inclusion of certified deaf interpreters in COVID-19 briefings. Now, I can't even imagine. I don't have a clue why the White House isn't doing this. Is it because they just love cruelty, and that's always the point, and they don't care about anyone, they don't actually think it's their job to serve? Or is it because what Donald Trump says is so incoherent and stupid that you actually can't translate it? I don't know. But this is just gross. The cruelty is the point for the administration. Let's just be truthful and honest here. The cruelty is the point. They don't actually view themselves as servants to the people. They're servants to billionaires and the people who write them big checks, whether it be to Donald Trump's fundraisers and super PACs, so he'll, get your son out of jail with a pardon, or it's Elon Musk to parade around and act like he's cutting government spending when in fact the only thing Elon did in government was help himself. And now he's gone, thankfully. But Jen Psaki and Elon's departure broke down all the ways that he lied and Trump lied about the cuts that were coming, which clearly didn't. And I want to take a look at that right here.
Remember how in the literal first week of his second term, Trump unlawfully fired 17 inspectors general across various federal agencies? The job of inspectors general is literally to root out waste, fraud, and abuse within their assigned agencies. So when Trump fired those IGs, he was effectively saying, I actually don't care that much about that at all. Fast forward to today, and the Washington Post reports that some of the replacements Trump has picked to fill the empty IG roles come from deeply partisan, deeply shady backgrounds. For example, Trump nominated a man named Thomas March Bell to be the Inspector General for Health and Human Services. And back in the late 90s, Bell notably resigned from a state government job after he allegedly mishandled thousands of dollars in taxpayer money. To be the IG for the VA, Trump picked a woman named Cheryl Mason, a former senior advisor to VA Secretary Doug Collins, the very cabinet secretary she's supposed to be overseeing, which seems tough. And for the Department of Labor Inspector General, Trump nominated Anthony D'Esposito, who, the Washington Post points out, is a former Republican congressman who lost his New York seat after he was accused of putting his mistress and his fiance's daughter on his official taxpayer-funded payroll. Sometimes you just can't make up the stories. Joining me now are two former inspectors general who were fired by Trump earlier this year. Mark Greenblatt is the former inspector general at the Department of Interior. Rob Storch is the former inspector general at the Department of Defense. Thank you so much for being with me here tonight. I think I told you both before we got started that I remember many days of waking up and seeing there was a new inspector general report that was going to be released. And when you're in the White House, you think, oh, something I can't say on television. And I raised that because I think the relationship, in my experience at least, and I think for most people who've worked in Democratic and Republican White Houses, is respectful but not friendly. Why is that important?
Well, you have to have some level of remove.
Yeah.
An inspector general can't be buddy-buddy with everyone. We know that, we're sort of the skunk at the picnic. And that's something that we take very seriously, that we need to have some distance so that we can be independent, that we can call balls and strikes just like an umpire in baseball, and that our findings, our recommendations will be viewed in a credible way because we're not too close with either party. That's the key thing for inspectors general, is to be independent, not political actors.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I'd add, when I was at the Department of Justice, we used to say that you'd get on an elevator and everyone would get off. It wasn't quite like that.
It would be awkward on the elevator.
It would be awkward on the elevator. But on the other hand, good leaders of whatever political persuasion, I think, appreciate it when people come to them, let them know about issues and concerns and give them an opportunity to address that. In order to do that effectively, you can't be too close to the people that you're overseeing politically or otherwise.
And because your responsibility, I think you probably would both see it, is to the American people and ensuring things are efficient and there isn't abuse of power or abuse of programs. One of the criteria, and one of the reasons I'm so grateful you both are here, is it's so important for people to understand what these roles are, because they're in every White House, every federal government, not in the White House, but in every federal government. And there was a description today in the Washington Post story by someone, where a former official, who said, there are basic thresholds that you need to meet in order to be a good inspector general. Have you managed a big office before? Have you done investigations before? Have you worked in this community? Is that right? What is she missing?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And it's critically important. The law has very clear requirements about what's allowed and what's not allowed in nominating inspectors general. It's not allowed to consider political affiliation. And that's critically important for the reasons that Mark and I have talked about. If you're seen as a partisan, there's no way you can do hard-hitting oversight or do it in a credible way, right? So the law is very clear that that's not allowed, and it is very specific about what is allowed. And what is required is that the person have integrity and that they have demonstrated ability in the areas that are relevant to being an inspector general: law, accounting, investigations, and the like. And that's up to the president to nominate people like that. And ultimately, it's up to the United States Senate, which has the confirmation power to ensure that people who are in these important roles meet those tests.
I started our segment just talking a little bit about how there has been this constant restatement of rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse as the objective of this administration. Yet when you see the firing, which you both experienced, and then the hiring or the suggestion they're going to hire some of the people I just talked through, what do you think of that stated goal of rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, it's certainly problematic.
Should we be surprised that the richest man in the world, one of the most corrupt billionaires out there, and a career pathological liar, and Donald Trump, weren't telling the truth about what they wanted to do in government? Should that come as a surprise to us? No, I don't think so. Is it something we should continue to talk about? Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to on this show every single day. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around at the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.